If you want to buy a fancy coffee machine, buy a fancy coffee machine. If you don't want to, don't.
Just spend the money on nicer coffee.
Honestly, yeah.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris and Savannah. We're going to talk about coffee FAQs. Savannah, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, my name is Savannah. I have been in coffee for 9 years, and I've kind of done almost all of it. I started as a barista for a long time. I was a barista manager, and then I moved into roasting. I've been doing roasting since 2017. Just kind of hopped around here and there. Right now, I'm working as a craft manager and associate roaster with Doshi House here in Houston.
Awesome. And my name is Chris. I've been in coffee for, I think it's like 6+ years now. I was a barista for 2.5 years at a Second Cup in Houston. And then I was at Boomtown with Savannah for a bit. And then now I'm doing marketing for Many Worlds Tavern. I still think I know how to make coffee a little bit. But
you definitely do.
So I wrote down a bunch of questions that I feel like I hear a lot when I was behind the bar. Sometimes questions that we get emailed into us for Many Worlds. I've never been a coffee roaster, but Savannah knows plenty more about that. Yeah, I guess we get started. So the first question is, what's the difference between different coffee beans? So I guess if you go to your coffee shop or the grocery store and there's like 100 bags on the wall, how do you decide? Or what's the difference between all that stuff?
Well, there's a lot of differences. So you can go as general as different countries of origin. So what country were the beans grown in? Or you can go as specific as variety. There are different types of coffee beans, and they grow better in different regions. They have different physical characteristics based off of the evolution of that plant. Some are better with heat resistance, some are better with drought resistance, some are better with pest resistance. So the farms choose their coffee based off of what grows well there, and that's generally, if you see like specific varieties listed on bag, that's gonna be it. But for the most part, if you're looking, oh wait, I didn't even mention processing. That's a whole different thing too.
Yeah.
Because it can be country of origin, it could be variety, but then there's also processing, which is how we remove the seed from the cherry, the coffee cherry that grows on the coffee tree. Wow, I'm really stringing together words today.
Yeah, I guess to follow up on that, like if you're new to it, how do you start to decide what varietals you like, what roast levels you like, what processing tastes different? I guess if you were a beginner, how would you go about starting to find your preferences, I guess?
I would start kind of broad. I would start with country of origin or process. Process is usually pretty easy. The vast majority of what you're going to find is going to be a wash process, but you will also see honey process and natural. Those are going to influence the flavor profiles directly, but then the country of origin will also help determine flavor profiles. For example, Latin countries tend to have more of a classic flavor profile of like chocolatey, nutty, caramelly, whereas Africans are a little higher acidity. Indonesian coffees tend to be kind of smoky, leathery, and earthy. So I would go as broad as possible. Either stick to a processing or a country and then go from there. If you find out you love coffees from Guatemala, but you don't like coffees from Colombia, what's the difference between those? Are they the same process? If they aren't, maybe you like one process over the other. Trial and error is really the best way to do it. And it's usually easier to do by just going to a coffee shop, because you can just try a singular cup of coffee rather than committing to a whole bag and finding out after the first pot that you hate it. Yeah, just go to a coffee shop and just, what are you brewing today? And just sip from there.
Yeah, I guess I'll add on that when I was new, I wanted to do that, but I think I had trouble remembering how they tasted differently. So if you can, go with a friend maybe and grab 2 different cups of coffee. Oh, yeah. And maybe ask the baristas like what 2 are really different. Because then when you have them side by side, it'll really highlight the differences between those 2 coffees. Yeah. If you get one classic coffee, like Savannah was saying, like a Latin American washed coffee, and then next to it you try like a African natural coffee, I think even if your palate is really like not well trained for coffee, I think anybody can taste the difference in something like that drastic. So
definitely.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest. If you are buying, we unfortunately don't have the ability to serve you 2 cups of coffee over the internet, but we do have those like sample bags, so you can do the same thing with 2 different sample bags.
Sample bags. I wish they were more common.
Yeah. What is Fair Trade Coffee? Fair Trade is an organization that certifies farms. They want to ensure that producers of coffee are getting an ethical amount of money for the coffee that they sell, and to ensure that there's transparency behind that process. So fair trade is kind of like a stamp that says, hey, you as the consumer know that this coffee was at least paid for by X amount, which is available on their site. Now, Many Worlds Tavern coffees do not have the fair trade stamp, but that doesn't mean we don't care about that goal of ensuring that our farmers, or the farmers that produce the coffee, are getting ethically treated and the transparency is there. So alternatively to a fair trade organization like stamp, we work with specialty coffee importers. In Houston, we're really lucky because it's kind of like a trading hub for coffee as far as in the US. So we're fortunate that we have local representation at like Inter-American Coffee is a big one, and Genuine Origin is another big one in town. All of the coffees, you can pull up their fact sheets. You can pull up the price that it was sold to the importer, and all the coffee that we buy is at a much higher rate than the fair trade floor right now. So not to say that we're better or worse than fair trade, but I guess one thing to note is that fair trade, it is a certification process. So if your farm is really, really small, you might not have the capability you have to pay fair trade to get the certification and to have the certification re-up itself over time. It's not always feasible for the smallest producers.
Much like organic certifications, it doesn't necessarily mean that the coffee is not organic. It just means that they didn't necessarily have the money or the resources to pay for the certification. Yeah, so like looking for fair trade coffees is a really good way to go, because you can ensure that you are buying coffees that help the farmers, but it doesn't necessarily mean that coffees that don't have fair trade certifications aren't fair trade. It's just not going through that specific business.
And I think that is probably the most commonly emailed question for Many Worlds. So we added a little page on the site to get into that a little bit. I really appreciate that it's in the conversation as far as people wanting to like make sure that just people being cognizant that that's an issue. I have a regular coffee machine. Why should I switch to a fancy manual method?
I feel like I have an answer for this that people won't necessarily think is a great answer. If you want to buy a fancy coffee machine, buy a fancy coffee machine. If you don't want to, don't feel pressured to dump a bunch of money into equipment. If you don't feel like it's going to, if you already like the way you're making your coffee, why not stick with that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it was popular for a while for baristas to like think they could make coffee better than machines.
Yeah.
I think it's just not, there's just not evidence that that's true.
Like they had special training,
like
and so their coffee
were special.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're okay, there's some truth in that. If your coffee machine doesn't get the water hot enough, that's something.
Yes.
If it doesn't like hit all of the coffee, that's something. But if it's doing like the basic act of like evenly adding the water to the coffee and it comes out in a reasonable rate and it's all hot enough, I mean, there's no way it's better or worse coming out of a kettle, So why would you want to switch to a fancy manual method? I think it's pretty superficial stuff. It can be fun to have a little ritual in the morning. It can be fun to smell the coffee as it's brewing, like smell how it changes. It can be pretty on your shelf, prettier than a regular coffee maker.
The aesthetics, man.
Yeah. I think we both agree that it's not necessarily better or worse. Just spend the money on nicer coffee.
Honestly, yeah. Or like maybe a nicer grinder. That's usually the first thing that I say. If you're really looking for an upgrade your grinder before you upgrade your brewer. But yeah, it's You don't have to have really expensive equipment to make really nice coffee.
Yeah.
And thinking that the idea that there's some kind of like, you have to put in a certain amount of money to get a certain amount of equipment in order to be able to brew coffee right. Like, no, there are people who use like what is essentially a sock for a coffee filter, and it produces a wonderful cup of coffee. So if you're already making coffee that you like, don't feel pressured to up your game at all. If you want to like get really into brew ratios and stuff like that, because that seems fun and engaging for you, then do it. But don't feel pressured to shell out just to get a fancier cup of coffee. If it's doing the job, you're good.
Thank you so much for watching the first episode of Coffee Questions with me and Savannah. If you have any more questions, please leave a comment below. We'll try to answer every question, and if neither of us knows the answer, we'll find somebody who does. If you liked the video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. If you want to interact with us personally, please join the Discord. Our link to that is down below. And if you need any coffee for game night or for any time, our website is manyworldstavern.com. Thanks so much.